I'm Faisal Karmali. Today we have Robert Price here. Robert is the founder and CEO of Bode Canada. I want to have Rob on the show today because, well, he's a disruptor, an innovator, causing some major waves in the real estate market today. So stay tuned at the end of the episode because Rob's going to be giving you his best pieces of advice for business owners that are looking to grow their business. Let's get started. It's time that we bring a disruptor to the show. This is a show that we've talked to a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs, experts in people's fields. But I'll tell you, I haven't had a guest like you who's really disrupted and innovated the market. So thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Excited to be here. Let's do this.
There's a lot I want to cover, but I want to talk about the business first, and then let's go back about history about you and how you got there. What is Bode? What does it do, and how does it impact the client?
So Bode is the first real estate transaction marketplace that connects buyers and sellers directly without requiring an agent to complete a home transaction. And that's true for consumers, that's true for builders. We have both of those market segments. So if you think of all the things you need through a process of selling your home from a sell perspective, you can list online yourself, we'll market the home for you. From there, you have this listing that's on our own website, on realtor.ca, on Zillow, on a number of other sites, and we digitally advertise that exact listing. So that all turns into 300% more views than you typically would have, which is one big part of our success. And then you can manage that listing yourself. Price changes, you make a renovation, that's all up to you. From a buy side, you find that listing, and then you say, I want to message the seller, I have a question, direct chat functionality, and then the ability to schedule a showing and make an offer. So negotiation between buyers and sellers with a digital approach that automatically creates a contract that brings you through to conclusion in the deal.
I can see that this is a different type of business than what a realtor's offering me. What got you there? What started that whole idea to be a disruptor in the real estate business?
Yeah, I guess it started with my agent buddy, Jeff Jackson, who ultimately became our broker. I was selling my previous place and buying a new place. And this is 2017. The last transaction I did was 2011. So I'd assumed that the market had really evolved in that amount of time. Not a safe assumption turned out.
Yeah.
And so I'm working with a very good friend of mine saying, okay, how am I going to sell this property? How am I going to buy the next? And I'm doing all the work. So I'm doing the market research. I'm looking at pricing. I'm looking at where do I want to go. I'm looking at exactly how are we going to price my place. Of course, we're doing both at the same time. And we land on the place that I want. And then he becomes my mouthpiece in the negotiation. I'm walking right through, here's the exact things you should say on both sides of the deal. And we conclude those deals. And at the end of it, I'm crying a little bit. He's laughing over a beer. And I write him a $40,000 check.
Yeah.
And I just look at that and say, I don't understand how that just happened.
Gotcha.
So that to me just was emblematic of a marketplace that has been kind of doing the same thing for a long period of time, hasn't had change, has become commoditized. Because I was working with one of the best agents and a guy I really trust.
Yeah.
And that was my experience.
Was it the 40,000 that made you think of this business? Was it the whole process? What was the trigger that said, I can do this different?
I would say the experience was first and foremost. So when we brought this to the table, we very much focused on, we want to build an experience that people would use even if they had to pay the same amount of money. Okay. That was our performance threshold. That was our standard of experience. And so far that's turned out to be true. People that have used it really value the control and the transparency and also the cost savings, but it is in that order of importance.
So you decide to launch this business where you're actually going to piss off a lot of people. You're taking away business, possibly.
Yep.
You're taking business away, and again, it comes from the view of let's talk about the real estate agent as an example. Mm-hmm. There are real estate agents who believe in the world of scarcity, and there are real estate agents like probably you and I who believe there's a world of abundance. And for the ones who believe in scarcity, you are potentially taking business away from them and providing it on an online opportunity where they cannot compete.
Right.
How was that experience? Did you get people coming back to you? Was there a lot of like backlash on that?
It's been a mixed bag because technically the actual model that we have, which is technically we're a brokerage. So in Alberta, we're listed across all 10 boards. We adhere to the standards of the regulations. That status has been there for quite some time.
Okay.
So we're working within the rules. We're not going outside of the rules.
Yep.
And the ethos of the company didn't come from a basis of, I think agents are bad. It came from a place of the whole industry needs to have competition and choice for consumers. And that really starts from, in my case, I had no real estate background. Our entire executive team and board hasn't done anything in the real estate transaction space, with the exception of Jeff. So we have a resident expert, then we have a whole bunch of people that come with fresh perspectives on the industry. And that is how industries become transformed. So you take taxi cabs did not, they didn't create Uber.
Correct.
The yellow pages didn't create Google. So you really need a fresh perspective, but you also need to understand the nuances of the industry because it doesn't change overnight. But really our ultimate goal is to raise the tides of the sector by automating a lot of this, what's become very administrative. And ultimately agents can still be involved, but they're doing more of the consultant strategic work that's really valuable and interesting also to them under our model.
So that was a interesting move, and a lot of people will say, what's your experience to actually not only disrupt a industry, but to start up a business like this from scratch with no experience in the industry?
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah.
There's a small company I heard that you're kind of attached to. And in Calgary, it's a big company. It's a very large company. And it's well known everywhere. Let's talk about Sunterra.
Mm-hmm. So Sunterra was started by my grandparents and their kids, my dad included, 6 boys and a girl. And that's now 40 years ago. So they started on the farm side.
Yeah.
And this really comes back to the fundamentalist view, which I don't know if it's genetic or if I've been taught it, or both, but really focusing on looking at a long-term value proposition. So it started just in pork and the genetics and making the best possible pork, and refining over 40 years. That's the bacon that people love today. And that transitioned from wholesale to retail in the early 90s, so some 10 years, 15 years into the business, where they just focused on fresh and quality. I've learned a lot from them. I deserve exactly 0 credit. I've not been involved in any capacity professionally, but learning from my dad and his brothers and how they work as a family. It is a family business, of course, and I have family in this business. That very much was helpful. On a global basis, families actually outperform non-family businesses if you just take the biggest picture. And a lot of that is trust and loyalty, and the stakes are higher because there's more investment, there's more
at risk.
There's more dinner table debates. There's your credibility in the family and the people that you love. You got to prove to them that you're really going to do this thing and take it to that level.
What did you learn when you were at the table and your parents or your family members are all having conversation about some business you're not even attached to? What was the stuff that you learned from those table conversations?
A lot of it is just getting the experience of hearing the challenges they go through, of course. But a lot of it was how much do they work together, who's got what job. They are very different personalities and they bring different skills. And I think that's an absolute critical factor in any business, but especially in a family business, because then you're starting with, here's the actual team that it takes, as opposed to, well, we're brothers, so we're going to do this thing.
Yeah.
It's saying, well, I'm actually good at this and you complement my weaknesses and I complement yours with my strengths. That's a big key that I saw around that table and still true today.
So there was a family business you were at the kitchen table for. There was another business that your family and yourself were part of, which is a completely different business than Sunterra. Many people might remember the name of it, Axia. Tell me a bit more about the company and how were you involved?
Yeah, so Axia was a forward-thinking, they basically, coming back to fundamentals, said what goes over the network is different than the network itself. Those are 2 different businesses. Whereas the telecom and cable co crowd has always just put those 2 things together. I'm TELUS, I'm going to sell you TV and internet and phone and IT services and software. We took that vertical stack, turned it on its side, and said, we're going to do one thing and one thing excellent. That's fiber optic, high performing connectivity, and make it available to everybody.
And that was a big one because you made it available throughout the province.
Yep.
You also went into outside of the country, U.S., Singapore. What made you pick those locations? U.S. we kind of all understand, but Singapore?
Yeah, sounds random.
Yeah.
So Alberta was the first of its kind. It was the biggest rural network in the world when we first built it, complete in 2005. So at that time, it was a huge deal. It was very much, people were still debating, can we squeeze connectivity out of copper, out of wireless, do we have to build fiber because it's expensive and it's new tech and needs to be proven. So Alberta was forward thinking back then, saw that opportunity, and we ended up with the most comprehensive network in the world from a rural standpoint.
Okay.
And then we took that model to France, the same open access principles, the same position in the market, and sold ultimately 30 DSPs, déploiements, as they say. My French is terrible. So 30 different regions throughout France. And then ultimately Singapore was a 1.3 million premise fiber to every home, business, government facility in Singapore. All 6 million people had access to it. And that, at that time, was also the biggest metro application of fiber to the premise in the world. So we had very rural, very regional, and then hyper dense, all with the same business model, which shows you how fundamentally sound it was and how needed it was.
What was your role in the company?
I started out of university. So I started at the very bottom as a business analyst. Then I was in the global business development team. So I was part of these international bids, not leading them, but part of the team. So immense learning opportunity there. And then I was ultimately at the end, I was running the whole revenue generating business for North America with a team of 80. And we brought coming all the way back to Alberta after we did Singapore, I started the residential business in Alberta where we built to 30 total communities in Alberta with gigabit speeds, the first in Canada to do gigabit symmetrical speeds for less than $100 and make them available, totally empowering the end user.
Axia was everywhere. Like it was Alberta, US, Singapore, like it was everywhere. And how flexible was that business model to actually be able to reach that? And what did you do to create that?
Yeah, there's a couple. So each one of the deals had a different government intervention. So they're P3 deals, or partnerships with the government. They invested some, we invested some, we brought partners in. That was the key flexibility. So actually creating a deal structure within the investment and ownership realm with each of those governments at each of those levels. But the actual application of the business model is very similar. So what we were doing in the market was very similar. We do this one thing, we make it available directly to consumers or to other retail providers that compete for the business. We started in Singapore, for example, there was 3 providers in the market. So Cableco, Telco, Mobility Guy. And 2 years into it, we had 27 providers because we had normalized fiber. We had made the connectivity part commoditized. So now it was more the value above that. How do you compete at the application, at the tech, at the media, the combination of all the things that we use networks for? How do you compete at that level? And that ultimately drove competition and choice and price and value for customers. That's why the governments and customers loved it so much, because they're so used to being held hostage to 1 or 2 options. We totally turned that on its head. So that was the universal value point that cut across all these international markets.
One of the biggest complaints I hear from business owners right now is that they have to deal with the red tape of governments. You had to deal with a lot of red tape of governments.
Man, enough for a lifetime.
What would you tell business owners watching this show right now about how do you, regardless if it's local, provincial, state, or even national level, what skill sets they need in regards to dealing with that red tape?
Patience. On one hand, patience and impatience on another, because you know the deal is going to take a long time. So don't expect a normal B2B deal. Don't expect a normal business setup. Expect to go through multiple layers of bureaucracy. Expect for the deal to change multiple times because you get new political leadership in. They want to do the opposite of the previous political leadership. So make sure that you're organized to deal with that change. to me, it still comes back to why you gotta really position with the government why it makes sense to them. You gotta understand them better than they understand themselves in terms of their policies and how the government works at a bigger picture level, because most of these larger governments, they work in silos. They have their ministries. They're not collaborating. So the opportunity to connect at the ministerial level and see how the broader picture can benefit the whole government, that's another big learning that we had for sure.
You've been part of or related to two very large businesses. This company of Axia then got sold to Bode Canada.
Correct.
Does that put a lot of pressure on you to perform in this corporation that you have now? Because now you've got some family legacy. People are looking at you saying, yeah, you're coming from a good pedigree.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
you better, I'm thinking like, the top NHL hockey players out there have a son, and all eyes are on that child and say, you better make the NHL.
Yeah.
Are you going to make it? Like, is that pressure on you?
The advantage that I have is yes, absolutely.
Okay.
But nobody puts more pressure on me than myself. So
Okay.
I'm used to that. I've always held myself to a very high standard. And in the sports analogy, my family their athleticism goes away before they can, continue on in their sports career. In this, Art's the chairman of our board. My dad's the chairman of Bode board. Because I've always thought there's a lot of people that set out to prove it on their own. Like in my case, go out and try to prove that I'm good and that I know what I'm doing and get out of the family shadow. I look at it the totally opposite way. Okay. There's so much knowledge there. There's so much expertise and experience. I want to surround myself with as many smart people as I can, especially when I'm doing something as big as this current business is and how big I want to take it. I want as much intelligence around me. And then it's just about the best ideas and the best strategies. It's not about who gets credit or any of that kind of noise in the system.
How did Centera and Axia, these two companies, prepare you for Bode?
I think primarily Axia, where I was obviously there for 10 years, 11 years, the ability to perform and learn a highly regulated, highly, let's say, traditional business. How do you compete with the biggest brokerages in Canada? Like in Canada, in telecom, we had these four big players that everybody knows. It's a similar dynamic in real estate. There's other smaller players as well. So you have to have been to war and understand what that feels like. You have some battle scars, but you're also hardened by it. You actually, we've been in a number of lawsuits. We've been in all kinds of scenarios where they're high pressure. There's big guys with bigger muscle than you trying to come at you. And so you got to be smart. You got to have an awesome team, and you've got to always never lose sight of the customer, because if you keep that clarity of what's value to the customer, all this other noise gets put in this other category.
So you've built, you called it scars, and you've called it, you've been to war, you've dealt with, I'm going to call it an oligopoly in the telecommunication industry.
Fair, yep.
And pretty much in the real estate business, it's somewhat similar. You've got the big players, and you're going to go to battle with them. And you're going to battle to a point where you are cutting fees that can be generated, and correct me if I'm wrong on this one, up to 75%
Correct.
reduction.
Yep.
So how the heck do you make money?
So we have the nature of our business. So if you take one of these larger guys that you're talking about, they have bricks and mortar. They have big overhead. They have all kinds of office space and all the administrative things that they have to go through. In our world, we have one broker, because that's what it takes to have access to the data that we need and get our customers on Realtor.ca where the market currently is, give them the highest chance of success. But the rest of the team is all about building this experience and supporting customers. So we're very much investing in the technology that becomes highly scalable as a result. Like right now, we cover all of Alberta with 15 people. We'd be able to cover most of Western Canada with not more than double that. Wow. So it's a high leverage organizational structure, and with that leanness, we can pass that cost savings back on to the customer.
There's 5 P's to a successful business that I talk about. So people, product, passion, process, and get paid. When you're
Not price. Price isn't in there.
Well, paid price. We can put it together. It's a good one. I'm gonna put another P on that one. How's that? There's a process that your client experiences. So you've got a process at the front, but you also have a whole bunch of people that are working to build a process in the back where your customer or client will never see. Mm-hmm. How did you build that process? And what's been the biggest challenge when it comes to that process?
Yeah, and this is one part of the business that's really interesting to me, and in software is really interesting because you can do anything with software. That's the biggest strength of it, is you can do anything, but also the biggest challenge is there's so much flexibility. How do you make decisions? How do you decide direction? And the golden rule for me is put the customer first. It's what we call customer centricity at our company. Yeah. Always have a multi-dimensional view on that customer experience, and don't take 2 years to build this thing. Take 2 months and then start testing it, get feedback, iterate, build, make it better, get more feedback, add a new feature, get feedback on that. So when we started the company, we had we call alpha testing for 2 months in the summer, and then beta testing for another 2 months before we launched, very, very early in our product cycle. Okay. And launch was September last year. And by that point, we had not only do you get all that feedback to make the product better and understand how people think, you also get people engaged and they feel like we say you have a seat at our innovation table.
So go hard on it for a couple of months, alpha test it, beta test it, and then push it out. Mm-hmm. And there are many businesses who will either test for a very long time, so they're coming to market at a slower pace, or they've got the paralysis because of analysis.
Right.
What do you think are some of the reasons why other businesses do it in that format and you've chosen to go a lot faster? That's a conscious decision you're making.
Yeah.
So why do it that way? Why not take it a little bit slower so you can get it right?
Because I think there's a very distinct window for this. It's not, time doesn't just, if I had 10 years, sure, I'd love to take all the time in the world to build it out if I saw this opportunity was sitting there for that long, but I don't think that it is. It's a balance. It's finding the fact that we funded this company ourselves, the board and executive team, and a short list of advisors and investors have funded this company. And so we have skin in the game. We want it to get going. We want to get that feedback and get to market. There's an adage that I agree with, which is if you're not uncomfortable, you're not going fast enough when it comes to tech.
Love it.
So you should be a little bit embarrassed. You should be a little bit nervous when you're actually putting this in front of customers, because it really is an ongoing process. Mm-hmm. Forever. In software, it's a continuous process every day. We're doing releases every day right now, 5 releases a week in some weeks. So that takes a certain person as well. Fiber optics, you build a network out in Singapore in 4 years. In this, you're potentially changing the experience every day. You have to like that iteration. You have to be organized. You have to have that energy and intensity and discipline to keep that organized, keep the data coming back, make smart decisions on that basis.
How big is your company right now in regards to number of staff? And do you see it growing? And what are the challenges of that happening?
Yeah, we have 15 people, full-time contractors, employees right now. Our plan is to expand across Canada. So we're just at the point of building that expansion plan, given our success in Alberta. We're now a top 10% brokerage in under a year in Alberta. So very fast progress and excited about that. So I built this team. I took a bit of a unique perspective when we started this company. I started with a full executive team and a full board. And almost nobody does that. But in this particular opportunity, I just saw the window as so clearly right now for this kind of model, this kind of solution. So I started with a team that I believe can take this to $1 billion company. If you take the rest of my executives, we're very top heavy. We have lots of experienced executives that have run big teams and been part of big roles in big businesses. So I did that intentionally, also set the company up in a way that it can go from private to public if that's ultimately what we decide in the future. So those were early decisions I took so that we could just focus on executing. Mm-hmm. And that's a big reason why we got to market in 6 months from scratch, is we weren't worried about shareholders and adding to the board and incrementally adding employees. We basically said, this is the team we're going to bet on right out of the gates. But over time, things evolve, people's priorities change. You hit new geographies. That's also the exciting thing, is building a team that's diverse and has a number of different attributes like that.
How hard is it to hire in your business?
Well, two parts to that. One is huge excitement to join Bode. We've had unsolicited, I'm not exaggerating by saying hundreds of people have just said, I love this. Can I be part of it? Which is very surprising to me and very cool. That's one of the number one metrics of success, is do people want to actually work for you? The second part of that that's been challenging more so is finding the tech talent in Calgary.
Let's go back to the Uber analogy. Uber started off as a rideshare company, turned into also Uber Eats, a separate, completely different business, using the same type of platform. Do you see this business evolving? Is it going to be in commercial real estate? Is it going to be something else that you can disrupt again?
Oh, it's a very good question, because there's a very successful business just doing what we're doing. So focusing on, currently we have consumers and we have builders. I know you've had some builders on your show.
Yeah.
We have those clients because they see the same opportunity to have a more efficient direct transaction or interaction with buyers, not having to deal with agents where they don't want to deal with agents in certain circumstances. As we continue to build our success and build on the momentum that we have, there is a number of different ways to look at a marketplace like this. There is commercial real estate. There is also white labeling our technology to other brokerages to give them the efficiency gains. Because at the end of the day, they're still taxi cabs, right? Coming back to your analogy, taxi cabs aren't going away anytime soon, even with Uber, that's this massive global success. And we know that, and we know there's a segment of the market that will always want that agent experience. So how do we work in an industry that has, where there's the establishment and the traditional process, but also look at the opportunities, beyond that as well?
In your personal life, starting up a company like this, with the pressure you have just already built on it, how do you have this work-life balance? Like, what do you do to get yourself away from this business, recharge, refresh, come back at it? And how do you balance those two things?
I had a lot of big drivers. Just go to the golf range and swing as hard as I can for hours. No, well, kind of, but
Kind of, yeah.
I'm a big believer in having a balanced lifestyle.
Okay.
So I'm not the guy that says you got to go, and even to the team, 100-hour weeks, everyone's working weekends, no matter what, we got to get through to this next phase, come hell or high water. I don't think that way. I think build a purpose and create a very clear vision of why we're excited about this company, the why factor. Mm-hmm. And then people will work to that kind of organic pursuit without any push. I know you're asking about me specifically, but I think of it as the team, and how do I think of it? And so from a team perspective, I'm basically telling these people that I work with, you have to go on vacation. Like, I'm forcing them on vacation because they're that passionate, that excited about the business. And working out is a big thing for me, big stress release. Even if you don't know you're stressed, you find out how much better you feel after the workout. Yeah. And sometimes just going for a beer or going for a couple beers with your colleagues or friends or family, and just completely talking about other things that are not work-centric, because at the end of the day, I really value that balance.
Rob, is that scheduled or is that ad hoc? And I'll give you my view. When I started building my practice, I would get to a point where literally my body would say, you got to stop doing this. And so then I would take my vacation. Mm-hmm. But I'd still be working when I'm on vacation. It was funny how I did that. Now I've evolved in my thinking to actually have scheduled vacation time. Mm-hmm. That I am going to have to turn off mentally from the business, from being in the business, so that I can relax and think about the business. Yep. How do you do it?
Well, it's interesting. In my previous role, it was more about I'm in the office or I'm not in the office. So when I'm in the office, I'm high intensity. I'm in there early. I've got energy. I'm going hard all day. I'm setting the example. But then when I switch off and I go home, I could more or less intentionally kind of forcing myself to have that balance and separate. In the current work environment, I think that's quite different because we're working from home. We started as a distributed office. Yeah. So for the first year, we didn't have an office at all. So we're working all online collaboration. And if you're doing that, then those lines are much more blurred.
Yeah.
So whereas in the past it's kind of black and white, now during the day, you can break away for a workout in the middle of the day and feel okay about it, because that night you're going to end up in some conversation and some collaboration of some kind, solving some problem. There's pros and cons to each. Proactively scheduling vacation is definitely a good idea. I do that, but it's also on a day-to-day basis. How do you just manage your time so that your girlfriend doesn't kill you, so that your family, you're giving your friends and your relationships outside of work, the energy and the attention that they deserve.
Your board of directors, there's family members on there. You've worked with family throughout your career. What is family time like? Like, how do you take yourself away from talking about business when you're at the lake, or when you're having a beer with dad or whatever? Like, how do you turn that off and just have that regular relationship?
I think when you're in that, let's say you're at the lake, you have more of it's have a beer and talk bigger picture. It's less operating and exactly the day-to-day and all the things that are right on your list and in your inbox.
Yeah.
It's more thinking bigger picture, which Art and I could do. Like, we bother people because we can just sit there for 6 hours and go on big picture stuff.
Love it.
I don't try to avoid those conversations. I like them.
Okay.
Even when I'm on vacation.
What are the 3 business tips you'd like to give to entrepreneurs today?
3 business tips. Well, I'd have to know their business a little closer, but broadly speaking, one key is never getting too high, never getting too low. You have these fluctuations, we all do, going through business. You have these crazy great days, and then you have days where you're feeling like, man, this is a tall mountain. And as a leader, you got to stay steady and keep everybody calm and keep everybody in that performance zone of stress. Some stress is good, too much stress is not good. Yeah. I would say the second key is just focusing on the fundamentals. Like, there's a lot of short-term businesses out there. Like, right now you could jump on the opportunity to build masks, and lots of people have done that. Kudos to them. From my vantage point, I like building sustainable businesses that will stand the test of time and truly drive change. So in order to do that, you need to focus on the fundamentals first, and then have a team to execute on that vision. And then the third, I would say, is have fun at it. Don't forget that this is fun. Sometimes you get wrapped up in it, in the day-to-day, the challenge that you have. And it's good to just take a step back, remind yourself, this is actually more about the process than the end game. You're always looking ahead because that's the next milestone. You're trying to build something important and impactful and making the world a better place. But at the end of the day, it's about that process and that fun factor and enjoying the navigation and all the curveballs that get thrown your way throughout.
Love it. Thanks for coming in today, Rob.
Thank you, Faisal.
Thank you for watching the Karmali Exchange. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. You can also follow me on social media at Faisal Karmali, where we can continue the business conversation.